Chapter 28, The Audience Commodity. Today's date, March 31st. So we are on to chapter 28 of our Unit 3 Media Text unit. You guys should have read the chapter, or maybe you're going to read the chapter after the video. Either way is okay. Again, we're going to start with our key terms, as always: privatizations, neoliberal, public service broadcasting, consumerism, commodity, and audience. These are going to be some of the key ideas and things that we'll need to bring up and discuss, items that you're going to need to understand in the context of media studies in order to move forward with the chapter and appropriately answer the discussion questions. So the discussion questions for this chapter are: how might we understand the phrase the cost of free media with reference to the notion of the audience commodity? Find and explain one example of when advertisers threaten to pull funding from a media, not the one mentioned in the text. And then last, describe the audience commodity as it relates to the attention your media adaptation sought to buy. Again, I will explain all of those as we go through the chapter. So, notes. Oops, need to move my little box over here. So here are your notes. A gentleman by the name of Dallas Smith introduced an additional element of PE in terms of approaches to media. 1981 is going to be the date on that. Dallas Smith said that when we were talking about PE and we were thinking political economies in terms of production structure and production, consumption, and distribution of media, some of the other things we've talked about is politics as a standstill, economics as a standstill, and those ideas as they are intertangled together. So Dallas went ahead further into the economic side of things. And he said, as far as economics are concerned, and we're talking about the spending of money and the transaction of money and changing hands between different media parties, but the economic relationship that drives media actually depends on audience, because the advertisers, in essence, are buying the attention of that audience. So one of your discussion questions ask about um, understanding how advertisers are buying our attention with the media that they're putting out to us. So thinking of the Lion King adaptations, you got to think about what were the advertisers really trying to purchase when they put out that media. um, what are the advertisers seeking to get from the audiences in return? Yes, part of it is, in addition, that exchange of hands, buying into that movie, but also think about what is the message of that movie, what is the meaning of that movie in terms of production and structure, um, and what is the advertiser really selling? What is he trying to get the audiences to buy into? We talked about feminism because we talked about the increased feminine female roles. We've talked about the authenticity and the historical accuracy of the film and just the truth and the reality behind um, some of the historical references being implied in that particular text. So, this economic relationship, the advertisers, what are they trying to get you to buy? That's what you want to look at. So, as we discussed in chapters 26 and 27, the European models had prior assumptions of PE that focused on meaning, message, and the physical commodities for the consumer. So, we're talking literally, what physical items are we trying to get you to buy? Apple tries to get you to buy an iPhone, an iPod, an iPad, an Apple Watch. But now we're thinking, okay, commodity doesn't necessarily mean a physical item that we purchase that we now get in our hands, because now we are calling the audience a commodity, and you don't really buy the audience as in, like, okay, this is a human being that I now own. That's illegal. Now we're talking about, we're buying a mindset, we're buying into their morals, their ethics, their lifestyles that they live. You're buying into their minds and a belief system. So in the 1980s, we had a surge of neoliberal regimes shifting the dynamic of public broadcasts. Okay. And what this means is you had a whole group of people who had a new mindset, a new way of thinking that changed other parts of our society. So public service broadcasting meaning this was media and media text and entertainment platforms that were funded by the government, and therefore they were unbiased. They were supposed to serve to inform and entertain the public in a very general, base level, unbiased manner. It's supposed to be well rounded, well developed, well informed, equally distributed information. And so that shifted in the 1980s. One of the key people in that is going to be Margaret Thatcher, as you should have read in your textbook. So with the 1980s, the shift of the public service broadcasting and the development and the idea of the audience commodity, researchers really started to get into understanding commodities, the boundaries of commodities, what can we call a commodity, and what is production. Okay, because that's the two sides of this: is you have the people who are on the side of production, what they are building, what they are making, what they are producing, and then you have the consumer and the commodities that those consumers purchase, obtain in whatever shape or form. So while traditional media platforms, newspapers, news broadcasts, TVs, those are your traditional productions. And so your consumer was buying the commodity of the actual newspaper. Um, the real commodity there was the audience, because in production you had your newspaper, you had your TV broadcast, but the people producing that newspaper and the TV broadcast are your advertisers. They are the people who pay. So you can think about it today in terms of think of a high school yearbook. When the high school yearbook gets put out, we buy things like senior ads. We sell ads to local businesses so that they can advertise. Those people are buying into your yearbook for the attention of the audience. That's what they want. El Rodeo, Chick-fil-A, Emerge Ortho, when those guys post their banners in our high school gym, they're buying the attention of the audience by putting those banners up. They're buying into and they're paying money towards the school, towards the yearbook, towards athletic department or whoever. But they're doing that because there's a bigger turnout in the audience commodity. They get that advertisement, they get that association with a school, which has its own perks and benefits. And so that's what they're really buying for. And while the traditional media forms are cheap for the consumer, it's the advertiser who really does all the paying because they're the one purchasing the audience's attention. So think about it now in terms of a newspaper or a TV news broadcast. Those things are basically free. There used to be a time when you paid 25 cents, 50 cents for a daily newspaper. I remember you used to pay $1 for the Sunday newspaper because it was thicker, it had more stuff in it, Sunday coupons and whatnot. But now I don't know that I know anybody who goes to a newspaper stand and actually buys a physical hard copy of a newspaper, because I can just as easily log onto the internet, bam, there's my newspaper. And if I've got a cell phone, I've got internet access. So it's really cheap for us as the audience, as the consumer, to get the traditional news media form. What's not cheap is our attention, because the advertisers have to buy that space. So when the Washington Post puts out their newspaper and they put out their website, they still have to make room for advertisements, because those advertisements are what pay the staff writers. It's what pays their servers so that they can keep their website up. It's what pays for printing out, if they still do hard copies, the actual newspaper itself and things like that. So what happens then and what's created is, unfortunately, the media is a little less critical of consumerism, because the media doesn't want to offend the consumer base. Because if the media offends the consumer, then who's really going to pay the price? The advertisers. If the media becomes too critical of the audience, so let's say TikTok or Instagram or some social media platform starts to publish and post critiques of people who spend too much time on social media, what's going to happen? those social media platforms are going to lose their numbers. And when those social media platforms lose their numbers, so do the advertisers who use those platforms to reach out to that audience. And your advertisers aren't going to pay for space if they're not getting an audience looking at that product at that time. So, and this is where we get to our last bullet point of the slide and the last note of the chapter is that advertisers have been known to threaten and pull their funding if a media outlet stray from their beliefs or if the media was publishing contradictory materials. Now, there's one example of that mentioned at the end of the chapter, but I want you guys to look into some more options because they are out there, and I just want you to kind of browse around and see a little bit here. What you're going to be looking at is, when have you noticed a conflict between advertiser and product? Whether this be a TV network. So let's say, I don't know, TV network like MTV. If MTV traditionally as a TV network is all about music and purchasing CDs or some kind of like songs or whatever, they're not going to run advertisements for a for like Amazon Prime or for Amazon Music, because MTV is all about music and they're trying to sell these artists and these musicians to people. But with Amazon Prime, I'm paying for a subscription for a service, and essentially I get access to this music without really having to pay for it because I'm paying for a service, a whole Amazon service. Does that make sense? That's probably a stretch of an example, but I want you guys to look into this some more. Where have you seen advertisers, or if you haven't seen it, when has it happened in the past that advertisers have been in debate or in conversations with their media outlets and advertisers think, okay, it's time for us to pull this because you're going to also air something that's going to contradict this message here, or your website doesn't really fit what we're trying to push, so let's not put our content here. We don't want to send mixed messages. And that should be it for chapter 28. I want to go back to your discussion questions. Let's re-hit those one more time. Make sure that you know where to find those answers. Question 1, how might we understand the cost of free media? So again, the cost of free media. A newspaper, the Washington Post. I can buy a paper copy of it, but it's also free access on the internet. So the phrase, the cost of free reference, with reference to the notion of the audience commodity. Think about here, who really pays for quote unquote free media? Okay, that's what the question is asking you. Question 2, find and explain one example of advertisers threatening to pull funding from media. Again, look into that, do some Google research, play around on the internet a little bit, see what you come up with. I'd be interested to see what else you guys notice that sticks out to you in terms of this particular problem in media. And then the last thing is, describe the audience commodity as it relates to the attention your media adaptation sought to buy. So again, thinking of the Lion King adaptation we watched in class, what were the producers really trying to sell? We are the audience commodity watching the Lion King. What are the producers actually selling? They're not selling you the movie The Lion King, okay? What ideas, what mindsets, what belief systems are they trying to get you to buy into? That's what I want you to be able to answer there, okay? So define your key terms, respond to your discussion questions. Here are your notes. This is your video lecture. Keep in mind you have a quiz on April 3rd. It'll cover chapters 26 through 32, I believe. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.